Hello, BookTube. In response to last night's hideously short video, quite a few of you emailed, not only to reprimand, duly noted, I had no choice. Real flesh and blood personal company comes first in my life and should be in yours. But in addition to being reprimanded, quite a few people wanted to see or hear about the books that were behind me on this shelf right here. This is one of the 3 bookcases that I devote to biographies, my own favorite genre. So I thought we would go through those. Some of them anyway. It's mighty chilly by Frida's window, so I might not last for the whole of the bookcase. But let's see how many we can get through. So we'll start up at the top here. A lot of these you will have seen already, because quite a few of these, at least at the beginning, are biographies that I chose to keep from last year. Truly outstanding books that I wanted to add to my permanent collection. And you know, a lot of you might be saying, "Well, shouldn't you have kept them all? Aren't you going to regret that you didn't keep the ones you didn't keep?" And probably a lot of that is true. Not completely. There were quite a few in any year. There are always going to be flyweight biographies, things that you know you're not going to want to keep. But I'm sure there were some that I got rid of that I will wish I had. That 2 years from now I'll say I don't know why I don't have that. but anyway, that's going to explain quite a few of these. The first one is this huge thing, Ramachandra Guha's concluding biography of the life of Gandhi. He did Gandhi before India, and then this is the famous years of Gandhi, the years where you recognize him as a visual icon in addition to everything else. And it's amazing. Just amazingly good. So I had to keep it. I don't know if I will be blurbed in the paperback. I would hope. But then again, I hope that for a lot of these. Here's a paperback that I am not blurbed on. This is A Life of Toscanini, the great composer. This is fantastic. I got an advance copy. I got the finished copy. I got rid of both of them. In this case, legitimately, because I sent them away. I knew that I would want this book. I actually didn't think it would ever be a paperback. I didn't think there was enough interest for, this is probably $30. $25. This is $25. But the 2 copies that I had, the 2 advance copies of this, went to people who are much bigger music fans than I am, so that was necessary. So I was very glad to see it in paperback. This next one, a lot of these made the list, the all-important Steve Reed's list of the best biographies of 2018. This one certainly did. This is Derrick McCullough's gigantic biography of Thomas Cromwell, the star of Hilary Mantel's novels, but also, for a long time, the star of Henry VIII's court, and responsible for a lot, including, in McCullough's contentions in this book, responsible for a lot more than we usually give him credit for, especially in terms of bureaucratic reorganization and the advancement of the religious revolution that was going on in England at the time. But it really, I was willing to sit and listen to all that kind of talk, about the mildly revisionist talk about Cromwell. But really, I was here for McCullough's writing, because he's just amazing. He's just amazing as a historian. I hope he has many, many more books inside it. And speaking of coming to a book for the writing, that would definitely be the case with this. This is Churchill Walking with Destiny by Andrew Roberts. And it's just the last thing that the world of biography needs, another 1,000-page biography of Winston Churchill. There's one every year, sometimes 2 in a year. There have been hundreds. There is nothing new. There is nothing revelatory in this. This is not a revisionist biography at all. The way Roberts' last biography, he wrote a doorstop called Napoleon the Great, that was kind of revisionist. That meant to take Napoleon Bonaparte's estimation and up it several levels, hence the title, which I don't have. I don't have Napoleon the Great by Andrew Roberts, even though it would be the Napoleon book that I would keep. One of them. There's one other by Adam Zamoyski, but the one that I would keep his Napoleon book, except that it's a question of editions, which is hardly ever true for me. When Napoleon the Great was published in America, it was called Napoleon: A Life, and it was boring. The cover for the UK edition was white with no words, just a field of fleur-de-lis. You had to examine the book to see what it was called, and the title was Napoleon the Great, which is the whole gist of the book. And the American redesign was so boring that even though I got it and read it and reviewed it, I didn't keep it, because I am figuring that somehow, somewhere, someday, a hardcover copy of Napoleon the Great will show up at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, or someplace else that I go, that somehow or other I will encounter a volume that, in the stereotypical case that somebody has a long plane ride, they come over with that book because they've always wanted to huddle down with it or whatever. They end up watching Groundhog Day on the in-flight movie service instead of reading. And then when they're here and walking all around and inevitably gathering all sorts of tchotchkes to bring back home, they think, something's got to go from my luggage. This book, I will bring it to this bookshop and I will give it to them, or I will sell it to them. And that happens. And I get a lot of UK editions that way at the Brattle. And I'm just waiting until I find a copy of Napoleon the Great, because I don't want Napoleon a life. But this book is not revisionary in the way that one was. This one doesn't try to recast the stereotypical worshipful, heroing, conception of Churchill. It just rewrites all of that stuff. The only reason why I love this book is because of Robert's writing. He is a fantastic writer. Just fantastic. And of course, in a book this size, even with a figure as outsized as Churchill, you're still going to have lots and lots of writing on other things, including World War II, which Roberts also wrote a whole book about. So I'm keeping it, even though I'm not Churchill's biggest fan. Then this next one, also an oft-told story. This is The Big Fella, Jane Leavy's biography of the American baseball superstar Babe Ruth. She, again, does such a fantastic job. I've read probably every major biography of Babe Ruth, even though I'm not a big baseball fan, just because his story is incredible on every level, not just the sports stuff that he did, that he set all sorts of records for, but all sorts of other stuff too, including the non-sports side of his life, the side of his life about business, about money, about trying to break into the managerial ranks of the sport to which he had given everything. And Livy does a better job with that than any other biographer. So this was, it would have been a keeper anyway. But what else is up here? Oh, we have a paperback. Okay, we have a paperback. This is Kenneth White's biography of the American President Herbert Hoover. This also is a revision, is a reimagining, sort of a revisionist account that intends, along with one other Hoover book that I don't think I have. There were two Hoover books in rapid succession, and they both tried to do the same thing. They both tried to up our estimation of Hoover, to stop yoking him with the Great Depression and look at his other accomplishments, which were considerable. And this does that. It also does a terrific job with personalities. Not just Hoover, but all of his cronies and all the other major political figures of the day. And I think I am blurbed in here. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Top on the inside. But a name. So that's good. Name blurbs are ever so much better than unnamed blurbs. Right. Okay. Then we have Walter Isaacson, the great biographer Walter Isaacson. He did a big book on Leonardo da Vinci. I had the advanced copy, and then I got the finished copy, gave both of them away. I knew there would be a paperback because he's a big name, and it came. And the paperback is gorgeous, full of inset color illustrations. Just there's no real the usual 8-page inset in the middle. That doesn't really happen. Instead, it's just color all throughout, that's fantastic. The covers are textured. The lettering is embossed. The only quibble I have, and it's not a quibble with the book, it's a quibble with myself. The only quibble I have is that I should have kept a hardcover of this. As pretty as the paperback is, the hardcover is even more magnificent. Just incredible. Again, I will see a hardcover of this at some point. And when I do, even though I have the paperback, I will snap it up. What have we got here? Oh, okay. This is A.J. Bane's Life of Harry Truman, Accidental President. I put some book reviews in here, but I don't think I'm blurbed in this one. Even though I did review it. I got lots of other people. Lots of other people to do it. But not me, alas. No, this has all sorts of poobahs. who are blurbed, and this is also revisionist. It's a key thing to do with presidents, is to offer a revisionist history of them. This is, for instance, a very different thing from David McCullough's. I don't know if I have it here. David McCullough's enormous 1,000-page Life of Truman was not revisionist. This kind of is. It's meant to sort of shed new light on different aspects of Truman's time in the Oval Office. I'm not a big fan of Harry Truman, but I was a big fan of this book. I liked it quite a bit. And then, well, that is the top shelf here. So, well, no, we've got. I moved these things off because they were piled on top of those books. I guess there are some here. You've seen all of these before. This is R.C. Bald's biography of John Donne. Absolutely definitive, the biography of Donne to have if you're going to have only one. I gobble them up whenever they appear, whenever a new one appears. They almost always disappoint in one way or another. Bald doesn't disappoint. This book is amazing. Not just exhaustively researched, but also eloquently written in a way that was common for Bald's generation, but is less common today. And then this is the paperback of Young and Damned and Fair by Gareth Russell. His, again, revisionist book about Catherine Howard, the teenage nymphomaniac who was one of Henry VIII's wives, one of his most gaudily unsuccessful wives. That's mainly due to the fact that she was just bottomlessly stupid. And I don't know if I'm blurbed in this one myself. I reviewed this, but it also has lots of poobahs, so I'm probably not. Oh no, I am. Yep, I am. Open Letters Monthly gets a blurb there. This is, I mean, its attempts at revision fail. Its attempts at elevating Catherine, especially its attempts at maybe displacing some of the blame for her stupid actions on her ladies-in-waiting and the ladies-in-waiting at court before her. Those, I don't think, succeed at all. But in addition to doing all of that, this book pulls together a lot of what's known about her life and world, a lot more than other Catherine Howard biographies. There haven't been all that many ever do. So even though I didn't agree with a lot of the central gimmicks of this book, I still absolutely want to keep it. Although you can see, I won't harp on this, but you can see these are scattered everywhere and they shouldn't be, subject-wise. I have 6 other Churchill books. That Andy Roberts book should be with them. I should have a whole shelf for presidents of the United States, since it's a favorite biography of mine to read. Catherine Howard should be with Tudor history. And none of they aren't, but that's okay. I will get to it. And what was the one other? Oh, yes. George Bull's biography of Michelangelo in a Penguin paperback. Don't think I've ever seen this in any other format, and I loved it when it first came out, which is, now I'm curious to know, when did this first come out? 1995. When I was not in the reviewing game. I was out of the reviewing game, but I read it eagerly. It came to my bookstore. Then we have this next shelf here. This is Catherine Duncan Jones' Life of Sir Philip Sidney, courtier par excellence. He's a great writer and also a great figure, and one of the rare cases where a great major figure in Elizabethan history actually had new documents come to life in the modern era. That hardly ever happens. and they didn't shed all that much light. They almost never do. Discoveries like that almost never do. But it spurred a whole bunch of Sidney writing and a whole bunch of Sidney reassessing. This is a wonderful biography. I am a fan of Sir Philip Sidney, mainly for his writing, but I love the adventure story of his life. And I'm also a fan of this author. She has never let me down with any books. And then this is the aforementioned Napoleon biography, the other one that I am keeping. I'm waiting for Napoleon the Great. But this is Adam Zamoyski's own big, gigantic biography of Napoleon. And it's not much less, in terms of hagiography, than Napoleon the Great. It's a little less, but it's not much less. This is still basically a worshipful biography, although it presents itself in its introduction as a warts and all portrait. Some of that is unavoidable because Bonaparte was mostly warts, so you would have to be engaged in Soviet-style propaganda not to mention warts. It's a question of whether or not you give them their due. I mean, it's a question of whether or not you give them their due. In Napoleon the Great, Andy Roberts says basically that the warts and all are mostly the backbiting of jealous historians and the negative spin doctoring of disaffected courtiers and wives. That it's more a corrupted historical tradition than it is any reflection of historical truth. I don't agree with that at all. A lot of that is in this book too, but a lot less of it. And Zamoyski again is a fantastic writer. I have a bunch of his other stuff. He's written other books, not mostly in the Napoleonic era. Terrific though, just terrific. What's next here? Oh, okay. This is a hard sell. This is Roland Jackson's Life of John Tyndall. Who that's him on the cover there. He was a Victorian polymath, did all sorts of things, read everything, went everywhere, studied everything. And I've known about him. He's popped up in other books that I've read. I'm a big fan of the Victorians. And I'd never really imagined that someone would write, in the present day, that someone would write a big, gigantic, socks and hat biography of him. And yet Jackson does, and it's really, really good. One of the best biographies I read that year, so I had to keep it. Okay. This is a great biographer. I would have read him on anything. The fact that it was this made it all the more attractive. This is Bob Spitz's biography of Ronald Reagan. Fairly big, not as big as could be. There are bigger ones for Reagan, but this is... I'm a little distracted because this is just a mess. These should all of my U.S. presidential and political biographies should be together. But Spitz is such a terrific, terrific writer. His book on the Beatles is must-reading. It's must-reading, no matter what you think of the Beatles, no matter whether you're interested in them or not. And this book on Reagan, I was looking forward to it the minute that I knew that it existed. I was looking forward to it. I read it eagerly. I loved it. The only hesitation that you hear in my voice is that it isn't. It didn't quite do it for me. This president, I think, is still waiting for his massive, truly definitive one-volume life, which is kind of amazing considering what a pivotal figure he turned out to be in American politics. It hasn't happened yet. I don't think this is it. I think this might be the closest that anyone's ever come. Leaving aside Edward Norris's Dutch, which is it's a whole different kettle of fish. If you've read it, you might know what I mean. It's a strange book. It's not meant to be, I don't think, a soup to nuts biography. But in terms of soup to nuts biography, I am still waiting. I don't know. Maybe I'm judging these things too harshly because I was so involved in observing the Reagan administration. I wrote about it. I made my living off it. I knew every detail. And I have been watching carefully as history has whitewashed out those details in a way that is alarming to me. Even if, no matter whether you're in favor of Reagan or against him, it's alarming to me that so much of the details, the nitty-gritty details that do mean something, that do matter, have been sort of airbrushed out of, or are being airbrushed out of Reagan's story. And I don't mean just by the public memory. I mean in books like this. It's a little disturbing. It's a little disturbing how many books like this I'm seeing from 1980s, dealing with 1980s politics, are resting a lot of their narrative and their conclusions on the official memoirs of the men involved. That is the last place a historian goes to find out what actually happened. Is to the self-serving memoirs of people who are trying to keep themselves out of jail or rehabilitate their reputations after having been to jail. That's the last place that you want to go. You want it for color, but only that. And it's been amazing to me that our few 1980s and early 90s American biographies, political biographies that I have here, that I still have them because, I really enjoyed reading them, but it's amazing to turn to the bibliography and see where the author drew most of their facts. And I don't know where to lay the blame. Because a lot of these, Bob Spitz is not a fool. He's a great biographer. John Meacham is not a fool. He's a great biographer. So where do you lay the blame? Is it that they know the limitations, the untrustworthiness of their resources, and are serving them up anyway because they know that will sell in bookstores? Or is it because the official libraries and records of these politicians and presidents are guarded by people who insist that you whitewash? What if the librarians themselves are the ones? Horrifying to think about. Anyway, I do very much recommend this. I'm wondering when it will come out in paperback. But I do very much recommend this as a one-volume biography of Reagan. Just didn't have that spark of brilliance that you really want in. Oh, okay, all right. This one did. This was a spark of genius from beginning to end on the least likely subject that I would have thought. This is Stephen Fry's biography of Benjamin Rush, a truly forgotten founding father. The word is tossed around a lot. I've seen it used for Paul Revere, for Pete's sake. In this case, people don't know Benjamin Rush. They don't know anything about him. And this was one of 2 Rush biographies that came out that year, and it is brilliant. Just brilliant from beginning to end. A great work of biography that does have that kind of I am taking nothing for granted brilliance on every page. I learned a lot about Benjamin Rush in this book. In addition to loving the author's writing, in addition to watching the author go through famous events in Revolutionary era history, I also learned a lot about Benjamin Rush, which that isn't usual for me when it comes to books set in the American Revolutionary period. That is not usual. I'm not meaning to sound more obnoxious than usual, but usually in books like that, I am not learning anything. I'm just watching the author move the furniture around, and that's entertaining enough. In this, I learned a lot. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Again, all of these things are probably getting their paperbacks this year. What's next here? Oh. Okay. This is Stephen Walsh's biography of Debussy. I loved it. Just loved it. I'm not a big fan of the composer. I'm not a big fan of his work. And something about this era of composers, these sort of clueless libertines, something about the whole atmosphere has always bored me just a bit. So when I got this, I thought, I got the advanced copy and I ignored it. And I got the finished copy and I thought, okay, we really do need to read this. I mean, it's a major work. So you have to read it. You can't just pass it up. And I loved it. Surprised me quite a bit. I learned, again, a lot about Debussy's music and his time. And also changed some of my estimations of the man, which I think was the whole point of the book. So it was one of 2 musical biographies that were recent. I'm sure the other one's on here because I wouldn't have got rid of it. Famous last words. I know. And then there's this next one. I think we saw this on. I think we've seen all of these on this channel. This is by Jamal Majoub. It's A Line in the River, and it's a book about Khartoum. In the light here, you can see that the cover is embossed. The city is embossed on the cover. Just a lovely design that I don't think they'll reproduce on the paperback if this gets out in paperback. And this is just, it's a history of Khartoum. It's also a sort of travel writing about current day Khartoum, and it's also fascinating. The best part of all for this book was what is usually the weakest part for me in books like this, and that is the autobiography of the author. He writes about his own life, just beguilingly, just incredible. Actually made it so that I would have read about it anyway. I would have read about it alone, without Khartoum, and the history and all of the fractured politics and whatnot. What a book this is. I wished I read it. It's one of those books. I finished it, and I wanted to just hand it to people, even though as an autobiographical look at the city of Khartoum, it's a little bit limited, right? I mean, it's not the same thing as, for instance, a big biography of Ronald Reagan. You can hand that to a lot more people. This, I of course, don't hand books to people except you, so I didn't do that. But I mean, even if I'd had that I had that impulse, but who would I have satisfied it with? I don't even know. I can't imagine. Okay, this is the next one. This is the other musical biography. This is Judith Cherniak's biography of Schumann. And the subtitle is The Faces and the Masks. And this is everything. This is his whole tortured life. This is all the people that he knew. This is the business that somehow managed to get conducted, no pun intended, throughout all the chaos. Told just wonderfully. I've read, I think, 2 other Schumann biographies, and this was far and away my favorite of the bunch. But actually, we'll do a little bit of rearranging now, because it should be next to the Debussy. At least we can do that. Then what have we got? Oh, okay. All right, this also needs to be next to Benjamin Rush. This is another Revolutionary War era biography. This is by Christian de Spigna, and it is it's Founding Martyr, A Life of Dr. Joseph Warren. By far the best and most comprehensive and also most intelligently sympathetic life of this figure. that I've ever read, and it should be next to Benjamin Rush because they're both legitimately forgotten founding fathers. But again, if you are interested in the American Revolutionary period, then these two actually you should either find at your library or make sure your library gets, because they are keepers. They are really great books, definitive on both their subjects. Okay. This is Elaine Showalter, The Civil Wars of Julia Ward Howe. Again, a learning experience for me. I like everybody, I think I had reduced Julia Ward Howe to a song and a punchline, to an extremely one-dimensional figure in American Civil War era history. And this, it was to combat a reduction like that this book was written. Give us a three-dimensional figure, an immensely sympathetic figure, despite the fact that I never got the impression in the course of the book that Julia Ward Howe was a particularly nice person. I think Elaine Showalter probably wanted me to get that impression. I never did. But still, 10 times more important and more interesting than I had thought before I read this book. So, okay. All right, well, this is Emma Denkinger. This is our Philip Sidney again. It isn't even with the other Philip Sidney book. Ridiculous. And I know there's at least one Sidney book all the way to the other end of the room. But this is an older version, an older biography of Sidney. This is Catherine Duncan Jones would be working with modern scholarly standards. She's writing for a scholarly audience. She's writing for people who want to know the documentary proof of what she's talking about. This, as you can tell even from the title, skews in a much different direction. This buys into and sells the Sidney romantic myth. Those things can have their kind of schmaltzy appeal, and this is immensely appealing on that level. Just immensely. You have to take, in books like this, or, something like Napoleon the Great, something like that, where a book pretty much announces its narrative intent ahead of time. You have to take books like that with a grain of salt. But I don't believe in the genre of biography that the announcement of such intentions invalidates the book at all. Not at all. I've never understood this 19th century German idea that history and biography have to be just completely arctically objective. I've never understood that. The list of books, of works of history alone, or biography, in the last 2,000 years that were written in white heat of anger or partisanship, in other words, that aren't objective, that we consider classics and rightfully consider classics, is as long as a boardwalk. So why? I mean, yes, rigor towards your sources, absolutely. You don't want to be claiming something that wasn't true, that didn't happen. But why not partisan? Why not have a dog in the race? I don't know. Maybe this is one of the many occasions in which the 19th century Germans and I aren't on the same wavelength. But this is a grand example of that other kind of biography, of romanticizing biography. Terrific to read, just terrific fun. But it needs to be with this other Sidney book, doesn't it? And what? Oh, okay, all right. We saw this process happen on this channel. I realized at one point last year, that, to my horror, that I had no Nathaniel Hawthorne biographies, even though he's one of my favorite American writers. And I knew, as soon as I realized that the Brattle would provide, that if I waited, I would find Hawthorne biographies at the Brattle. They would turn up, or they were there already, and I just ignored them. And sure enough, two of my favorites did. This one is by Edwin Haviland Miller, and it's Salem is My Dwelling Place. Big, standard, beginning to end life of Hawthorne. I found it in a trade paperback. I had this once in a hardcover. No idea where the hardcover went. And I will see it again in hardcover at the Brattle. I grabbed the paperback because it was basically free, and because this is a wealth of scholarship. Not exactly written like a bolt of lightning, but a wealth of scholarship. And it was, of course, one of the first ones on my mind. But the first one on my mind, the most delightful Hawthorne book that I know of, is this one. It's by Philip McFarland, and it's Hawthorne in Concord. Comparatively thin. All of the other Hawthorne books that I will eventually get are huge. But this one, I just love. It captures so much of Hawthorne's particular agony when it came to composing. His particularly odd relationship with the world of writing that he wanted to enter, that he wanted to support him. And it's also wonderful with his relationships to the people in his life, the Peabody sisters and all. It does in a few pages a lot more than what a lot of bigger biographies do in much more pages by concentrating. And I just love that. I was hoping to find it. It was one of the first ones I found. Okay. All right. This is A Very Private Eye. This is truly sui generis. It's a truly weird book about and by Barbara Pym. Huge stretches of autobiographical sketches, letters, diary entries. It ends up being wonderful. The cover, I think, is extremely well designed because this is a kind of mosaic, often by our author's own hand, rather than one particular study of herself. And it works better that way. I had a paperback of this that I read, and I'm a little hard on my books, and it fell apart. It broke into pieces. And I knew that I'd seen many, many hardcover copies. In fact, I had a hardcover copy right before this one that I gave away. And I knew you see this at the Brattle. So I knew I just had to wait. And I did. I found it. That's a horrifying picture of the author on the cover. Just horrifying. There she is, standing in an English village. And look at that happy, friendly animal she has by the throat. Doesn't it look happy to be in the picture? Yeah. That's a happy animal. That's an emissary of Satan. But the standard critical boilerplate about this book when it came out was that it reads like a Barbara Pym novel. Don't you believe it, Book 2? If the word of Sean the Book Maniac isn't good enough for you, allow me to add my own 2 cents to the subject. That nothing reads as good as a Barbara Pym novel itself. So stick to the novels. Find a bunch of them and read them. And this last one is huge. Oh, okay. This is Nicholas Shakespeare's biography of Bruce Chatwin, the tortured and picaresque and Sebastian Flight style travel writer, great essayist, a weird figure in the art world, a fascinating someone who needed a biography this big. And this is the UK edition. I loved the book when I first got it. And I still do. The natural companion to this thing that I want really bad. There was also a big collection of his letters, and I had it, and I loved it. I remember distinctly putting bookmarks in it, annotating it, asking all sorts of questions of it. In other words, I was involved in the book. So it's amazing to me that I don't have it, and that somebody else has that volume. But somebody does, because I don't. So I'm waiting for that to appear. But this, I go back to this all the time. And not just for Chatwin. Shakespeare is really good on the whole era, on lots and lots of people involved. And Chatwin touched, perhaps I put that wrong. His life was involved with a lot of other lives. So that can be fascinating. And I think is that it? Is that as much as we can do? This next shelf is jam-packed. We've got the big, gigantic paperback of Ron Chernow's Grant book. Which I loved, absolutely loved. I was worried about it. You might remember me saying this. The Chernow's Alexander Hamilton book I loved, like everybody else. I thought it was fantastic. And then his Washington book, I hated it. On every level, I hated it. It was the kind of hagiography that we're talking about, only carried to just foaming at the mouth levels. Just unbelievably embarrassing levels. To the point where, when I finished it, I thought, okay, well, that was one great book. And one horrible book. I didn't read or really count his other books. I counted those 2 because he's clearly never going to write anything but presidential biographies from now on. And I thought, okay, well, in that vein, you have written one great book and one seriously horrible book. So, it's all up in the air what the third one's going to be. I was seeing advance notice for Grant, and then I got an advance copy, and I was almost afraid to start it because I thought, if this is the same thing as the Washington book, then that's the loss of a great talent. But this is terrific. Just amazing. I need not have words. It's huge, but it's terrific. This next one, I squealed about this when I got it on the channel. This is Song in a Weary Throat, a memoir of Polly Murray that is just, she went on to be a sort of much more impressive figure, a big, florid, headline-grabbing figure. But this is a story about her life, and it's written so beautifully. And it never in a million years occurred to me that anybody would give it such a lovely reprint. It never did. Part of the happiness there was surprise that it would exist at all. And what is this next one? Oh, okay. This is Charles Nicholl, the author of The Reckoning. I may say over and over again that I think there should be a moratorium on the title Reckoning for a book, but his book, The Reckoning, about the death of Christopher Marlowe, is incredible. Title or no title, it's incredible. It really deserves your attention. And so that book alone made him a must-read author for me. But then this is a fascinating subject in its own right, because Rimbaud was he was an enfant. He was a punk poet, reviled in France for his personal habits, but also elevated for his poetry. And even when he was first writing poems, there were those among the cognoscenti who recognized them as genius, and he gave it all up. Just stopped being a poet and went to run guns in Africa. And that's one of the rare pictures that we have of him in that other part of his life, in which he was literally somebody else. He was a completely different person. As far as we know, he never wrote anything again. It's an amazingly interesting story anyway. And I knew that if it got into the hands of someone like Charles Nicholl, he researches. Charles Nicholl finds new things. A lot of The Reckoning about Christopher Marlowe was new ground being broken, and the same thing happens here. I knew that I would love it, and I did. All right. This next one is Jane Kamensky's Life of John Singleton Copley, the great painter John Singleton Copley, who had a major biography at the beginning of the 20th century, and then another major biography in the middle of the 20th century, and then this was at the end. And it deserves a place with the rest of them. I don't think I have any of the others. I think this is it. And I just loved it. I also love Copley. If you ever are unfortunate enough to be trapped in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts with yours truly, you will hear a lot about Copley paintings. I will take you through every detail of every painting that's there. All right. This is Catherine Tempest's biography of Brutus, the noble conspirator. I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. It's a little bit long on conjecture, but you have to be with the life of Brutus. We don't know as much about him as we would like to, despite the fact that that's a whole book. Oh, David Blythe's biography of Frederick Douglass, an absolute classic, a toweringly important book. Belongs with all of those others, with the Gandhi and the big fella. Just an amazing, amazing book. It's just about an incredibly important American. This is just I cannot gush enough about it. The next one's a paperback though, and it's New York Review of Books. Oh, right. Okay, yes, this is Richard Holmes, his classic, Shelley: The Pursuit, about Percy Bysshe Shelley. This is. I forgot for a minute that New York Review of Books reprinted this, much less that I got it. I have another New York Review of Books classic that's occupying all of my attention at the moment. So it's crowding out all their others, because there's a New York Review of Books classic coming out that is crowding out everything else. Oh. When I get a copy, you're going to hear the squealing all the way to Saskatchewan. But this is great. This is the best Shelley biography. Wonderful. I don't know what it's doing here with all these others. Oh, okay. All right. This next one is a venerable old thing. This is Lady Elizabeth Longford did a 2-volume biography of the Duke of Wellington. First as the defeater of Napoleon, and then as a disastrous politician. They're 2 big, brightly colored books. And later on, a generation later, there was another 2-volume Wellington biography. The name of the author is escaping me at the moment. The books were even bigger. Each book was even bigger than these. And the split was almost exactly the same. You pretty much have to end the story with Waterloo. One half of the story. Pretty much that's your breaking point. It pretty much has to be. And I had them. For the longest time, I had those other 2 volumes. I don't think I do anymore. I think I decided that, A, I don't like Wellington enough to have 2 enormous 2-volume sets of his life, and that B, this was just more entertaining to read. I had occasion, I was writing a review of a Wellington-era British politician, and I knew there would be a great deal of material in Wellington biographies about that person to supplement the book that I was reading. And when it came time to come out here and consult the biography wall, I went straight to these. I ignored the more recent one. So I got rid of it. I figured, and that is an actual ridding that I don't regret. That the details of Wellington's life are the same in both books. The writing is much better here, and there's a kind of a wise, wry humor running throughout these books that's totally missing from the other two. The other two were just sober works of scholarship. So that's not a case where I regret getting rid of those. They were new and they were pretty, but I knew that I wasn't going. That I don't. First of all, need 6 or 7 or 8 or a whole shelf of Wellington biographies. I only really need one, and that's the one I wanted. So I just got rid of the others. Oh, look at this. This is Julian Jackson's great, enormous biography of Charles de Gaulle. And again, I have this. I liked it. I loved it. I wrote about it. But this is still a placeholder, because the thing I really want is the French version. Even the UK version. The UK version is titled A Certain Idea of France. A famous line from one of de Gaulle's memoirs. This is just called de Gaulle. And the other one, the UK edition, has a better cover, not an out of focus black and white archival photo, but something better. So I have this, and I'm very glad to have it. But I will still nevertheless keep an eye out at the Brattle and other places for A Certain Idea of France, just so that I can have the version that I exactly want. Then I found this paperback of Agatha Christie's autobiography, which is a downright strange book. I reread it and was just blown away at how much I enjoyed it. But it is a very strange book. It is a very strange book. In terms of autobiography, it's gorgeously written. I think better written than any of her novels. But in terms of autobiography, it's an act of concealment, almost exclusively. It reminded me a lot in that way of A Backward Glance by Edith Wharton, an autobiography that is designed to obscure the subject rather than clarify it. This is very strange, but enjoyable in a way. Gail Christensen's Newton biography, In the Presence of the Creator. This is the best Isaac Newton biography, and it's amazing. Just amazing. Just so wonderful to bring out the human involved, and to underscore at every point the suffering. Newton suffered a lot in his life. It wasn't all just one discovery after another. He was a tortured figure, and this brings it out just perfectly. And there's a wonderful story attached to this book from eons ago. it was a featured selection in the History Book Club. I used to belong to the History Book Club for years until they done me wrong. There was we had an acrimonious exchange of letters over a missed shipment. But this was a featured selection in the History Book Club, and at the time I was thinking, even with the History Book Club's discounted prices, it's a little too much for what I was making at the time. And me sainted ma, I was kvetching about this with her, as Irish Catholic sons will do. And she came to me out of the blue one day. Me sainted ma was not a reader. As she always used to say, I'm saving my eyes. At the end of her life, at the very end of her life, when she was still saying that, I used to joke with her. I'd say, well, Ma, what are you saving them for? The organ bank? She'd say, that's your mother you're joking with, She came to me out of the blue one day and said, how about I buy that book for you? The first and only time she'd ever said anything like that to me. And I said yes, of course, and it made it all the better that I thought the book was great. If the book had arrived and it was substandard, that would have been a little bit bittersweet. But as it is, I smile whenever I see this thing. In addition to it being fantastic, and then, okay, this is The Gentleman from New York. This is a great biography of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a congressman that was a weird and wonderful figure, charismatic, as intelligent as the day is long. And this book does him justice. I wouldn't have thought, when I was watching Moynihan and when I was reading all about him, and I basically followed his career from beginning to end, I was very much under the impression that no one could really do him justice. And he was just that kind of a mercurial figure. There have been a couple of others where I think no one could really do you justice. No one could really capture what you were. And this book does. So I highly recommend it if you're... But again, it's an American politician book. It should be I will reorganize. I am going to reorganize in 2019. And then I think the last one we should do, because Frida's clearly bouncing around. She needs to go outside. This is Colonel Young's The Medici. This is a modern library, big volume with a great cover illustration. His gigantic history of the Medici family. Just wonderful, wonderful stuff. He's a terrific writer. This is old. I don't even know when Young's Medici came out. It was a long time ago. Yeah, it was first published in 1933, but I don't think I've read a modern treatment of the Medici family that's any better than this. This is, again, it's a lot like other survey things that we've been talking about. You read this once for enjoyment, then you let years pass, then you read it again for enjoyment. But if you're me, I also then, many times in between, consult it. When there's a specific Medici involved, or a specific Medici-related figure, like Savonarola, or an era, then I will pull this book down off the shelf. I'm seeing now that it needs to be fixed a little. I will pull this book down off the shelf and just reread that part, and maybe sift through the bibliographical notes to see, okay, I've read that section of your book. Now, why did you write that? Why did you come to those conclusions? Who did you consult? So this is a perfect example of a biography in my collection that I do use. Most of these are examples of that, as opposed to just stuff that's sitting there. And that's it. This is a hideously long video, but you needed a hideously long video, didn't you? This is just an impromptu, partial biography bookshelf tour, because I realized belatedly that I was teasing you by having this over my shoulder when I was basically telling you goodbye. So I will wrap this up for now, but we've got other book stuff to talk about. Even as long as this video is, this is probably not the last you will see of me today. Thank you, BookTube.